Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to do part 2 of our interview with Dan Vogel. This is our 2019 interview. Originally, this was 3 segments. I'm going to put them all into one so you can watch the whole thing all at once and hopefully improve the sound and some things like that. But we're going to talk about the Book of Abraham and the problems with translation. And so Dan's going to explain his view of the Book of Abraham. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. All right. Well, let's move on a little bit because the other thing, and I know you've put a lot of videos lately on the Book of Abraham.
Yeah.
And that seemed, I went to a conference at BYU. I know Robin Jensen was there and Brian Hauglid and a few other people. It was really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the Book of Abraham. And a lot of that took place right here in Ohio, just up the road, a couple hours, right?
Right.
So
in Kirtland, Ohio.
Yeah, tell us about how the mummies got here and all that stuff.
Yeah, okay. So they were discovered in Thebes, in Egypt, and they found a huge catacomb of mummies, and mummies usually have these 3 kinds of records actually. They could have a book of breathings or a breathing permit on their chest, usually in their crossed arms, sitting there. Book of the Dead, or hypocephalus, that round facsimile 2 under the head to hold the body heat. And the breathing permit is to breathe in the next life. And so there were 11 mummies made their way to America, and somehow this Michael Chandler got a hold of them. He said that he inherited them from his uncle, but that has never been established. More likely, he was commissioned by some men in the East to tour with these and sell them and make money. So he's traveling. We have newspaper items from Cleveland where he exhibited the mummies. He sold, by the time he got to Kirtland, he only had 4 mummies, 3 female and 1 male. And the scroll that later was identified as the Book of Abraham scroll, the Book of Breathings, anciently owned by a priest named Horus, and on the chest of the male mummy. So Michael Chandler came into Kirtland, Ohio, in late June 1835 or July, probably July, but about the 3rd of July, I think it is. Joe Smith sees him. You have to pay to see him, so people are paying to see the mummies. Joe Smith is interested in the papyri, but not the mummies. But Chandler doesn't want to sell them separately because he wants to sell everything, go home probably. And Joe Smith arranges with there's like 3 parties that get together, and one of them's him, but he has a problem paying, of course. But $2,400, which is quite a lot to purchase all of those. And he purchases them, and shortly thereafter announces that there's 2 scrolls, and one scroll he identifies with the record of ancient Joseph, and another one with Abraham. And the earliest account we have of that is 19th of July. William W. Phelps, W.W. Phelps, writes a letter to his wife because he was in Missouri, and he came to Kirtland, and he's helping with the printing, Oliver Cowdery with the printing, and he's also arranging the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, and he's Joe Smith's scribe. and he works in Joseph Smith's office, and he's staying with Joseph. He and his son are staying with Joseph Smith. He writes his wife and mentions Joseph Smith as no one could read these writings, and that Joseph Smith has identified them as the writings of Abraham and ancient Joseph. So, also, the main article we have written on this is December of 1835. So 1835 is a pretty busy year, you can see. One of the things, so the main article is December. In the Messenger and Advocate, Oliver Cowdery publishes a long letter he wrote, this guy, describing the scrolls and other things. He mentions 2 scrolls. He mentions one writing, astronomical writing, which is probably the round facsimile 2, hypocephalus, and epitaphs, and for the dead, epitaph scrolls. So what he really has is one Horus scroll, Book of Breathings. He has one on the oldest female. There's a scroll, Ta-Sherit-Min, Book of the Dead, which is what we identify later as the record of ancient Joseph, which is the one that has all the nice little pictures and stuff, and drawings of things that Oliver Cowdery describes, like the Pillar of Enoch and, 3-in-1 God and stuff like that. So, he also has some fragments, because these things are breaking off. The end pieces of scrolls are breaking off. And he probably sold this one, Amenhotep scroll. He probably sold that with another mummy, but he had probably some fragments that had broken off that Joseph Smith ended up getting, and we don't have it anymore, but he had that Oliver Cowdery and W.W. Phelps copy parts off into these little notebooks that were later named, one of them was named Valuable Discovery Notebook. So I call them both Valuable Discovery Notebooks. I call them 1 and 2 or whatever, Phelps and Cowdery. And he translated parts of that in these notebooks. And it identified the mummies as ancient Egyptians. Ketumen, Princess Ketumen, her father Onitis, her mother would be Ketumen also, because it turns out that this name turns out to be a royal lineage name. So does the Onitis. So he writes about them and gives approximate, the years in which they lived in the Valuable Discovery notebooks with drawings. And then Oliver Cowdery writes, above this paragraph of hieratic Egyptian characters stands a figure of a woman, which is really a man, Amenhotep, the owner of the scroll. So he had fragments from that are lost now. So for the month of July, it seems he was working on identifying the mummies, who the mummies were, and also starting an alphabet of the Egyptian language, there's 3, which are like little notebooks. They're only like 5 pages each. One's in mostly W.W. Phelps. Then there's one in Joseph Smith's handwriting, and one in Oliver Cowdery's handwriting. And they draw these characters in the margins and brief definitions, meanings. They're not really translations. They're translations, but they're really not like that. This means exactly this. They're more like definitions, like a dictionary. What you expect a dictionary, kind of a vague meaning. And instead of a precise word, like you might expect. So they're called alphabets. And they're more like a dictionary, really. So then they started a grammar in a larger volume, that they transitioned these alphabets into this grammar. So the alphabets actually, some people thought that, this is the working papers for the Book of Abraham, and they've debated which came first, the alphabets or the Book of Abraham translation. And there's a reason for that debate, because they say, this is the working papers. He shows the characters. He doesn't know what he's doing. With the Egyptian, it's all wrong. And then they look at the book of Abraham over here, and the Book of Abraham has different characters. None of these, though. We have 3 major Book of Abraham translation manuscripts for Kirtland, Ohio. One mostly in Warren Parrish's handwriting. Well, all of it. Excuse me. The next one in Frederick G. Williams' handwriting. And then a third one that has half a page in W.W. Phelps' handwriting, and then the rest in Warren Parrish's handwriting. So, and they all have characters in the margins. A character kinda looks like, if you look at it quickly and not pay attention closely, you'll think, there's just a character and a paragraph, a character and a paragraph, and a character and a paragraph. And they're all the same for all 3 manuscripts. And the manuscripts are 3 different lengths. Warren Parrish's goes from verse 4 in chapter 1 to verse 2 in chapter 2. Frederick G. Williams is a little longer, from verse 4 in chapter 1 to chapter 2, verse 6. And the third document that has W.W. Phelps has the first 3 verses that nobody else has. And then Warren Parrish's starts in the same place, but goes even further to verse 18 of chapter 2 of the present Book of Abraham. So what happens is that so the reason why we say the month of July he did the alphabet and grammar, the alphabets and the grammar and the bound volume, where they transition from these small little leaflets to a big book, and they leave space between different parts, is that in the history of the church, for July, it says that so this is being written in 1843 with Joseph Smith's help. He's hearing it read on occasion. And it's W.W. Phelps and Willard Richards working together, writing this portion of the history, July 1835 period. Talks about purchasing the papyri, translating part of it at least, learning who wrote them, Joseph and Abraham. Then about the 17th of July and after the remainder of the month, they worked on an alphabet of the Egyptian language and a grammar as practiced by the ancients. So that dates it to July. And W.W. Phelps is there helping to write it. He is an eyewitness. He's one of the guys doing it, right? Joseph Smith is hearing parts read on occasion. I mean, this is 1842, he worked on the history of the church way beyond that even, hearing parts read, even though these other guys are writing the actual words. He dictates some parts, but a lot of times W. Phillips is working independent from his own memory. So we don't know exactly what's going on, but this is the best source we have for dating what is being created when. So we have the alphabets being created in July, and the grammar in July at least started. They're still working on it, the grammar. They abandoned the alphabets. They moved to the grammar. The grammar is still being worked on until October 1st is when there's an entry in Joseph Smith's journal says the astronomy of the Egyptian astronomy was unfolded to us. And that is the last part of the grammar before it was abandoned. After this, Joseph Smith, this is probably what happened, even though this is all debated and disputed, but I believe this is by far the strongest evidence. Joseph Smith's journal on the 19th of November mentions going to the temple and reviewing the construction of the temple with Warren Parrish and Frederick G. Williams. And then it mentions, and then they translated from the Egyptian. So these are the two writers of the two first documents that I mentioned, one by Frederick G. Williams and one by Warren Parrish. Frederick G. Williams just maybe a paragraph longer than Warren Parrish's, and they both begin at verse 4 of the first chapter of the book of Abraham. So, and there's evidence that both of them were writing at the same time, that they were writing simultaneously as Joseph Smith was dictating the translation. And the reason why we know that is that both of them make corrections at the same time. And they do it in line, not above the line. Meaning they write the wrong word and they both cross out that word and keep on going. And there's only one way to explain that, is that they're both writing at the same time. If one was copying the other, they would just skip the bad part and keep copying. And if they were writing it, why would there be a different dictation at a different time?
So Joseph said a word and then said, no, that's not the right word. And,
yeah.
Okay.
And more than once, it happens. There's like 3-4 times where the only way to explain it is that way. Now,
is Joseph using a stone in the hat like he is with the Book of Mormon?
Not sure. There are some hints that he was. I think probably Preprat mentions a stone. And I think Wilford Woodruff mentions the stone, but I'm not sure.
So we're not sure that he's looking at the Egyptian characters, because with the Book of Mormon, it seems like the plates were just off on the side.
Right. So I don't imagine he's actually looking. I believe they do have it open on the table, because there is a part that mentions the record before you. And when it talks about, a likeness of the gods is in the representation at the beginning of the record that is lying before you, they cross that out because that doesn't sound right when you go to publish that. And they put something else there that's more generic. So, and they both are making these corrections to that in different ways. They both correct it in a kind of a different way.
Okay, so let me make sure. So at the beginning, it looks like they were like, here's an Egyptian character, and this is what we think it means, and here's an Egyptian character, and this is what it means. And then, clearly that was not a correct translation, if you're looking at the papyrus. So they abandon that, and then they go to this new grammar book, and then essentially Joseph is dictating to them, and they're just writing down what Joseph says. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, so the picture I've painted so far is that they've gone to the valuable discovery notebooks about the mummies, the identity of the mummies, they've moved to an alphabet. And I haven't talked about the content of that too much. Then they moved to a grammar book that is larger and covers more. Then suddenly, and they work on that until October. Then Warren Parrish gets hired at the end of October. Then on the 19th and 20th, actually, Joseph Smith's journal mentions working on the translation. Then on the 24th and 25th mentions working on the translation. On the 26th, it talks about something about transcribing transcribing from the records or something like that. Then Joseph Smith gets sick. They get knocked off that project, never returns to it until Nauvoo in March 8th and 9th. And before that, probably too, Willard Richards makes a copy of everything that was done in Kirtland without any characters in the columns or anything. There's a few editorial changes. They published that in March 1st issue of the Times and Seasons. Then on the 15th, they publish chapter 3, 4, and 5. The end of chapter 2, chapter 3, 4, and 5. And these 3 chapters, they all bear evidence of Joseph Smith's Hebrew lessons. And Joseph Smith didn't have his Hebrew lessons until January of 36, January to April of 1836. So most people date those chapters to Nauvoo when Joseph Smith's journal is saying he's doing translating. On the 8th and 9th, Willard Richards is writing in Joseph Smith's journal for him about translating for the next issue, which is on the 15th. They're not always on time, but it's the issue that's dated the 15th and has the hypocephalus, the facsimile 2, with all the astrological and planetary, Egyptian astronomy in it. So that's kind of the basic layout, but the apologists want to just mess that all up. And it started with Nibley. And Nibley was way off on his chronology, way off. He tried to date a lot of this stuff to 1837 when some of these men were having problems with the Kirtland Bank, right? And so in Nibley's scheme, they're trying to compete with Joseph Smith. And that all these handwritings in these documents, these are copies, not originals, first of all. So when I was telling you about crossing out and stuff, that proves that those are originals. And so the Book of Abraham, we have the originals. And he didn't dictate those until probably November, when his journal says he did. And so that means the alphabets and grammar all came first. Well, Nibley and the apologists after him, John Gee and Carrie Mielstein, want to reverse that, which messes everything up. So as a biographer of Joseph Smith, and I'm working on this era right now, I want to get the chronology right. So that's why I took it on and made those videos as part of my working out this chronology. That's what I was mostly concerned with more than anything. So, because it makes a difference of how everything's unfolding. So Nibley's scenario was that Joseph Smith had nothing to do with the alphabets or grammar, the bound grammar. The bound grammar actually says the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language. On the tops of some pages it just says alphabet too, but it was taken from the alphabet and put into the grammar in a different way. Okay, so what happens is in the So I'm going to argue that there's so many, this is such a huge, complicated subject, so it's really hard to know where to enter. But Nibley tried to argue that these men were competing with Joseph Smith, and they tried to reverse engineer Joseph Smith's translation. That they're the ones responsible for the characters in the columns of the translation the Book of Abraham manuscripts, that they wrote it in there trying to guess which ones, and they guessed wrong. And so they're trying to transfer the responsibility for the evidence that Joseph Smith didn't know what he was doing, actually, to the scribes. These men are Joseph Smith's scribes. They're writing in his journal as scribes. They're scribes. They're trying to transfer the responsibility of making all these mistakes. It's the scribes. They're all speculating about which characters go where, and they just got the wrong characters. Nibley tried to argue that it was a completely different scroll somewhere that had red writing, and this Book of Breathings thing has no red writing on it. But the Book of Joseph one does. And the red writing comes from Oliver Cowdery's December of 1835 description in the Messenger and Advocate. Beautifully written, part in red and part in black, and a small part in red writing.
Yeah, because I think the scrolls were eventually lost for a long time, 100 years maybe? Is that about right? No?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's about 100 years.
And then there was
57.
It was assumed they were...
Or 71, actually.
It was assumed they were destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire.
Yeah.
And then they were rediscovered when?
Well, the museum, New York Metropolitan Museum, they knew they had them, but it started becoming more known, and they were turned over in 1967, the scraps. What happened is that to give it the history of the scrolls after this project is Joseph Smith had displayed them. He cut them into pieces and put them in picture frames, basically under glass. The end parts of the scrolls he cut off because they were deteriorating, flaking off, and he put them under glass. So on the Horus scroll, it was about 3 feet. This becomes a dispute also that I'll talk about later, but it was about 3 feet. It's about 4 inches wide, about 3 feet long.
Okay.
And it had facsimile 1, then a portion that has like 2 columns of hieratic, another one, facsimile 3, which is no longer with us, and maybe another part before that, and maybe another part, a picture somewhere in the middle, but probably not. But 3 feet, Joseph Smith chopped off the first foot about, which is what we got now. And he glued them on to thick paper that had the blueprints for the Kirtland Temple on it. And he glued them, and the foot. It was a foot that broke off with facsimile 1 and the text. That was cut later after it was glued onto the paper, put under picture frames. Joseph Smith would show them in Nauvoo. The other part stayed intact, about 2 feet. Remember, it's like 4 inches and 2 feet long, about that. Mm-hmm. And that part probably got burnt in the Chicago Fire of 1871. So Joseph Smith, he also chopped up the Ta-Sherit-Min papyrus, Book of the Dead, into like 9 or more pieces. Not like that even, and just all over the place. glued it onto paper, and to preserve it. Then Lucy would show the mummies and show the papyri to people, and she was really keen on it, and she kept them until she died in 1856. Soon as she died, I mean, not very long afterwards, Emma sells this stuff to this Combs. Jacob Combs. Anyway, so this guy buys a whole lot, and he sells them to the St. Louis Museum. And the St. Louis later sells them to the Chicago Museum, Woods Museum in Chicago. And the 1871 fire, and Joseph Smith III said they were there, and then there was a fire, and they assumed it all got destroyed. They didn't know that part of the collection was given to Combs's like servant or maid or whatever. I forget her name now. She had them, went to her daughter. She sold them to the museum, New York Metropolitan Museum.
Okay.
So they had these fragments, and the museum gave them back to the church, and that's all they have are these fragments. And some people try to say the actual Abraham scroll was burnt in the fire, not these things. The only problem with that is that, so for all these years, we've had these translation manuscripts with the characters in the column on the page and what looks like the translation. Mm-hmm. And when the fragments came out, the one that was attached to facsimile 1, you could see that the first character came from the first part, the next character and next character. Now we know where the characters came from, except about 6 of them were fake, invented characters. And they happen to coincide with where the scroll is damaged and there's a missing part. So when you roll up the scroll and the worms start eat it through the roll, and you unroll it, there's like these missing parts. Every time there's a missing part, Joseph Smith invents a character and puts it in there until he reaches a part where there's another one.
Oh, I see. And
he just keeps going for 4 lines. And that's where it ended in Kirtland. So one problem,
yeah, because I know Hugh Nibley said, oh, well, we're missing these aren't the right scrolls.
Yeah, and they say that's the wrong characters. But you're going, and it's not a translation. Nobody knows why these characters are in the columns. There couldn't be so much English words per one character. Everything that he said is wrong. And it's been perpetuated by the current Egyptologist apologists. The amount of translation is due to the comprehensiveness of the language. In December 1835, on Oliver Cowdery's article in the Messenger and Advocate, he said that language is very comprehensive. When you look at the alphabet and grammar, it has 3 pages that begins the grammar, the bound grammar, has 3 pages in the beginning that explain that each line, each dot has a sentence almost, And when you add up all these little parts, and it says, this is the character dissected, and then it takes each line, each dot, and gives it a translation in the grammar. I mean, if you're going to criticize it, you should at least know what they're claiming. So they claim that it's a comprehensive language, and they explain why you get so much from one character right there in the grammar. So, and Nibley tried to say, and the current apologists repeat it, that, these characters in the column is just an exotic way of organizing all 3 documents so that they know where to go to each paragraph that's the same. The problem with that is that they really don't begin each paragraph. They begin each part of the translation. When you look really close, it's not a paragraph where each character appears. Sometimes the paragraphs are split right in the middle of a sentence and another character. Or there's a fragment of a sentence, just one, about 5 words to a character. So they're dividing the text up to line up with the characters. They're not arbitrarily put in there for decoration or an exotic way of organizing the paragraphs. It's very obvious. At the top of the third translation of the Book of Abraham, the one that has that 3 verses in the handwriting of W. Phelps, at the top says, translation of records have been found in the catacombs of Egypt. And in the other column, character. So, and then Phelps takes the first character and numbers it 1. The second character numbers it 2. And then over here underlines like Chaldea 1, Abraham 2. Then there's a third character he wrote, which is a real elaborate one that is dissected in the alphabet. But it doesn't number it because it has a lot of parts. The other 2 just have 1 part. This one has a lot of parts. You'd be, all over the place trying to match it up. But the translation next to it, if you look in the grammar and you find that character, that's the translation given that character. So, another interesting thing is that the complete translation, the longest one, the one that has the first 3 characters. So if Warren Parrish and Frederick G. Williams were just making personal copies, why would they skip the first 3 verses? Well, they skipped the first 3 verses because it's already written by W. Phelps. And they're continuing. So what happens is, we can tell that this third group of pages, like 5 pages, 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8, I don't know, I can't remember, but the one that starts in W. Phelps' handwriting, continues in Warren Parrish's handwriting, and goes all the way to verse 18 of chapter 2, the longest document, was originally in a book. Because when you look at the inside margin of all of them, there's like somebody took a razor blade and it exactly copies the angle of the cut and everything. Whoever did it very sloppily because they cut through some of the character on the top part. So they removed it from a book. So originally there was a grammar book and a translation book, exactly the same. And evidently the translation book was the finalized translation. And what happens is, Frederick G. Williams, Warren Parrish wrote from Joseph Smith's dictation simultaneously. Parrish left and Frederick G. Williams wrote another paragraph and stopped. And Parrish also left drawing 1 character without any translation. So, which implies that the characters were being written as they were going. And he left before he could do the last paragraph. Then he copies this and probably uses Frederick G. Williams, copies it into the book without any changes really, not a lot of editing or things going on. He standardizes some of the spellings of the gods and things, but which is another reason you can tell it's orally dictated, because when Frederick G. Williams and Warren Parrish were writing simultaneously, they spelt the god Elkanah or Elkanah. One spells it mostly Elkanah, and one spells it mostly Elkanah, which reflects Joseph Smith's New England non-rhotic accent. Right?
I park my car and have a job.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Wata.
I used to live in New Hampshire.
Wata,
Or in New Hampshire.
The idea. Yeah, stuff like that. That's his accent. And because they're writing a weird name they never seen before,
They didn't know if
they
it
had
was
to
a Cain or a
guess.
Cainer.
Yeah. So they had to guess. It gets standardized eventually, but when it gets published. But so that's another indication that not only are they making the same changes, but that it's being orally dictated. And things like this has been noticed. I should mention that Brent Metcalf was really on to this kind of stuff before I came around and started studying it myself. But anyway, so the longest one was in the finalized book, and there were 2 books, and the other 2 were continuing W.W. Phelps's project. So if these 2 documents by Frederick G. Williams and Warren Parrish, we know Warren Parrish didn't become a scribe until October 29th, right? And so then the next opportunities, the 19th of November, when both of these guys are mentioned in Joseph Smith's journal as being together with Joseph Smith and then translating afterwards. This document at the top of these 2 documents also mention the 5th degree of the second part, which is an allusion to the grammar book. This is showing you the order in which they were created, not the reverse of what the apologists and Nibley and the other apologists want. And that this was oral. Also, we have evidence that it's an oral, like they would write for thee instead of ee, they would write the. Mm-hmm. Actually, because it sounds the same. The gods, they would write thee with 2 e's. There's other indications of this, and so. Also, the reverse translation theory doesn't work because the alphabets really aren't a precursor to the Book of Abraham. Neither is the grammar. There's alphabets being written in July according to the history of the church entry. The alphabets have 5 parts. And some apologists try to say, 5 parts, those are the 5 columns in next to facsimile 1, Abraham on the altar being sacrificed. There's columns this way. There's 3, 2, and 2. And then the other columns, the words read this way. And so in the next part of the scroll, the words are written from right to left, like that. And over on the facsimile, there's columns up and down, and they said there's 5 of them, so that must be the 5 parts. They don't bother checking their theory because it's not true at all. There's part 1 is from those valuable discovery notebooks about, you read the content, Princess Ketumen. And it says, and Princess Ketumen, or a female of the royal lineage, the daughter of Ham, discovered Egypt while it was still underwater. So what it's saying is that it's trying to explain why Abraham and Joseph have records that are found on Egyptian mummies, right? So, and it explains that they have a right to the records, to have the records. But Egypt was, even though this is being translated from characters that are from the Amenhotep papyrus, not the Book of Breathings, not the Book of the Dead, but the Amenhotep papyrus that is copied in the valuable discovery notebooks with some invented characters. And the one invented character is the one about Egypt being discovered underwater. So it's talking about the Egyptians and that they come from Ham, the daughter of Ham, and Egypt was discovered by a woman while it was still underwater. Well, this ends up in the book of Abraham, but that's not the origin of those paragraphs in the book of Abraham. It just so happens that Joseph Smith invented a character that's sort of like a character that does appear in it is an actual Egyptian character in a way, but it has 3 parts. But it doesn't occur in the record that supposedly came from Abraham. It occurs in the gap. So right in the Abraham, when they're copying characters, often it gets to the gap, and there's invented characters, and there are actually 3 characters, kind of a group of a character, that run over the margin. So because these characters run over the margin of the translation documents, shows you that the scribes being particular, if there were just decorations, there's no need to run over the margin into the English. They're trying to keep the correct character in the correct place, right? So it's inconvenient. The margin's not big enough, but if it's decoration or just a way to organize, they could have just used numbers or alphabet or something, but they use the Egyptian characters. They would have just used one character. Why slop over into the margin, out of the margin? Anyway, so the character that Joseph Smith invents ends up as part of the character he invents in the alphabets and gives the definition for underwater, is part of the 3 characters that appears over here in the translation documents for the part in the book of Abraham that talks about Egypt being discovered by the daughter of Ham while it was still underwater, and her name was Egyptus, right? Anyway, it's quite clear that part 1 deals with the mummies, not Abraham, but even though part of it somehow ends up over there. Part 2, people have already noticed that it matches the pure language sample. That there's 6 or 7 characters from a letter that W.W. Phelps wrote his wife on the 26th of May, 1835, a couple of months before the book of the papyri were purchased in Kirtland. So in May, before July, right? W.W. Phelps write a sample of the pure language to his wife and gives about 6 characters and definitions. And it says, all man for God, son, all man for Jesus, sons, all man for mankind, Well, the words come from 1832, from a definition that Joseph Smith gave in 1832 of the Adamic language.
Oh.
Right? So it's part of the pure language, the Adamic language, which they associated with tongues. The early Mormons associated with tongues. That Joseph Smith said Brigham Young was speaking the Adamic language and then spoke some himself. And some other members, like Elizabeth and Whitney, spoke in tongues, and he said that was the Adamic language, and that you would never lose that gift. So this part 2 doesn't come from anything dealing with Abraham, really. But it becomes really important because this part 2, it gives God, Jesus, mankind, ministers, ordained, unordained ministers. So it's giving grades of humans. Then that finally evolves into the celestial kingdom. And then the definition for the terrestrial kingdom. And then it then explodes into the Egyptian cosmology of 15 ruling planets, 15 moving planets, 15 fixed planets, 3 ruling ones, 12 other planets. So what Joseph Smith ends up doing there is copying what he did in the Kirtland Temple with the pulpits, where the 3 presidencies, and the 12 apostles, or the 12 high priests of the High Council, right? High Council of Kirtland, High Council of Missouri, So he has this presidency of the, K. Van Rash, 2 others. I can't pull out my head right away. Oliblish and, anyway. So, so he has 3 ruling planets over here, and then he has 12 others, makes 15. So he has kind of a pattern of the priesthood as he understood it in 1835 being projected onto the heavens. So, so in the alphabets, you have the beginning of that, which doesn't really, he does the pure language symbols that are the same. Then he starts taking from like column 3, I think it is, from next to facsimile 1. And then he adds a few in between, and he takes more off of there and adds a few in between. What he's doing is he's making an alphabet. He makes one. There's like one with it looks like a man with his hands raised above the head, and he gives a Masonic definition, a sign of grief and distress that will help you escape. But then the next sign he invents, which is just a U, which is like that shape. So he does several things, and one's a bird, and then he does a couple of more shapes that aren't on the papyri. So he's making it like an alphabet. And then he gives names, and then he gives definitions. But in the alphabets, in July, he makes characters, but he doesn't give definitions. But these characters get copied into the grammar book. But before I get to the grammar book, he keeps on going with part 3, part 4, part 5, without any names or definitions, but they are copied without alteration from the columns next to facsimile 1. So then they figure they need more room. These things are like pamphlets, And they copy these characters. So part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5 of the first degree. It says the first degree without explaining anything else. Then they copy these into the grammar book. And they copy the first part in 5 degrees. So they take the first part of the alphabet, they copy it across 5 degrees, and they leave blank pages. This character, the next character, and all 5 degrees. And Joseph Smith gives definitions and expands them as it gets to the 5th. Then, when they finish the first part, they get into the second part of the pure language. And there they do it differently. The first one goes in the first degree, the second character in the second, and he keeps going until it gets to the astronomy part. Then it goes across to all 5 degrees because he wants to develop them more. He's really into that. So my explanation is that he's using this. He starts a translation. It's about Abraham, but he needs a brainstorm. Okay, he doesn't have much time. He's still July. He's just barely got him, right? In the Book of Mormon, he had to have 4 years to think about it. But here, so he needs to stall. He needs to think about what he wants. I think he basically knows what he wants to do, because there are, in the English text, when you read the English text, it tells you what he's trying to prove. Okay? He wants to prove the high priesthood, that there's a lineage from that came up from the fathers to Abraham of the high priesthood, the priesthood ban, the patriarchal priesthood ban on the descendants of Ham. Later in Nauvoo, it becomes a preexistence, the plurality of gods. So he's like a pseudepigraphist. You know, the ancient pseudepigraphists smuggle in new doctrines by writing pseudepigraphical texts. So that's what he's doing. But he's brainstorming. So he could brainstorm on these characters and expand them in each of the 5 degrees. Because the 5th one goes way, you know, especially on the cosmology, Kolob and all that, just goes big. On the 5th degree, he starts out small. And you could tell when he's doing like the female line of the queen, princess and queens and stuff, it's a little artificial between 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th. He's just trying to look like it expands. But when he gets to the cosmology, boy, by the time he gets to the 5th, it's like a huge paragraph. And so that's how he delays it till November, from July to November, and then he thinks it works it out in his mind, gets that flash of inspiration, get the paper, boom, and he dictates it. He's got the picture he wants, and he goes for it fairly well.
He's studying it out in his mind.
Yeah. So on what's really important too is that D&C 107, believe it or not, ties into this. Because in D&C 107 is where he's expanding the 2 layers of priesthood, the lesser priesthood, the high priesthood, or the patriarchal priesthood, and that there's a line from Adam to Enoch, and that Adam in the valley of Adam-on-Diamond gives a blessing to his posterity, and that they were all there, the people that were alive anyway, in this lineage, and that they were all high priests. This is something that's missing from the Bible. There's no high priest. There's a Melchizedek who's a priest. And then the book of Hebrews makes it into, Jesus, the great high priest after the order of Melchizedek, But Melchizedek's just a priest. And there's no lineage coming up. The Bible doesn't talk about Adam having a priesthood and handing it down to Seth and so on to Enoch and to Noah. And finally, it gets to Moses. So what he's trying to do in the expansion to D&C 107, which was originally about the high presidency of the high priesthood being over the bishop, he expands it to include this lineage of the high priesthood. But then it says, and all of this will be explained in the book of Enoch. All this is written in the book of Enoch to be revealed in due time. So I believe he was working on, and the book of Enoch would have been in the pure Adamic language. And he was going to dictate a book of Enoch that explained the high priesthood. That would have been the pseudepigraphic text. This just alludes to it. This would have been the text to prove that there's the high priesthood. A lot of the men that Joe Smith ordained to the high priesthood didn't get it. Why this extra priesthood? Some of them complained. Why do we need this high priesthood? And some of them didn't even want it, really. And they thought the eldership, that was enough. The apostleship's wound up in that. What can be greater? So, high priesthood, Jesus is the only high priest, so some people had that, so the answer is, and Joe Smith wasn't the only one struggling with high priesthood. There was the Jews, the Talmud, the Midrash. They all struggled with, how did they give animal sacrifices by what authority before the Levites? You know? And so the Jews would struggle over this, and they would quote, Psalms 110 about Melchizedek, which is used by Christians as an allusion to Jesus too. The Lord said to my Lord. Oh, the Lord said to my Lord. There's a Trinity. There's the Father and Son talking. Well, the Jews would refer to that for a different reason. That Abraham received the priesthood from Melchizedek. That's what it was really about. And that Abraham's scribe actually is the author of that psalm. And so Christians struggled with it also. Christian theologians struggled with it. So Joseph Smith solved that. There was a lineage of patriarchal priesthood. And this was partially to justify the ordination of Joseph Smith Sr. to the patriarchy, to the office of patriarch, or the patriarchal priesthood, to give blessings, the spiritual blessings. And when Oliver Cowdery copied the blessings into the patriarchal blessing book in September of 1835, that's when he introduced John the Baptist giving authority and Peter, James, and John giving authority, and said that this was as ancient Joseph prophesied on the other scroll that they're working with.
That they never translated.
That they didn't translate. Mm-hmm. But Oliver Cowdery mentions this in the Patriarchal Blessing book. In the introduction to Joseph Smith Sr.'s blessings, which they expanded these blessings beyond what was given in 1833, they expanded them. But in the introduction, Oliver Cowdery explained how can Joseph Smith Sr., by what authority did he give these blessings that he's about to write? And he says from his son, who was ordained as a patriarch, that Joseph Smith held as an elder, the authority of the patriarch that he gave his father. Then when Oliver Cowdery writes his own blessing that Joseph Smith gave him in 1833, Joseph Smith expanded his own blessing to include that an allusion to be receiving authority, the lesser priesthood, by John the Baptist, one in the bush from one who got it, for John the Baptist anyway, and then those who got it from the Messiah gave it to them. No date, of course, but it's an allusion to the Peter, James, and John. In fulfillment of the ancient Joseph's prediction.
Okay, so let me make sure I'm with you then. So I guess in a nutshell, the Hugh Nibley line of reasoning, or whatever, is we've got these Kirtland Egyptian Papers. They don't match. The translation's incorrect from what we have. We lost it in the Great Chicago Fire, but there was something that was lost, which I guess, could we assume that that's the Book of Joseph that was lost in Chicago?
No. We have the Book of Joseph, which is the Ta-Sherit-Min papyrus, which is part of the ones that are chopped up onto the thick paper that we have.
Those are the Joseph scrolls.
That was identified as Joseph. In December of 1835, Oliver Cowdery, in the Messenger and Advocate, described that papyrus as including the Pillar of Enoch, also the 3-in-1 God. There's a little drawing of three figures. Mm-hmm.
So have we lost anything then?
Yes. We lost the part that was intact, the 2 feet. We have 1 foot of the beginning part, facsimile 1, and the next one, and then another one, another fragment. Then there was 2 more feet, probably,
and this is
that were missing, that included facsimile 3. And the reason why we know that is because when Emma sold the papyri to Combs, and then Combs sold it, part of it, to the St. Louis Museum, there was an Egyptologist there, not remembering his name right off, but he gave a description of the papyri for the museum's catalog, and in there mentioned facsimile 3.
Okay.
And Osiris, the name Osiris being on it, because the name Osiris is on this.
And so that's the only piece that we lost. So we have what Joseph,
that we know, that we can exactly say. We don't know.
But we have essentially what Joseph said was the entire book of Abraham, the entire book of Joseph. We have those that we can still look at today, but those are really the Horus scroll and the Book of Breathing scroll. Is that correct?
Right. So we don't have the Amenhotep fragments. They could have been there. Facsimile 2, the hypocephalus, the round one, was already pretty damaged because they made a drawing of it, and there's parts missing, and Joe Smith had headlock. They
filling the missing parts
to make it look nice and neat. I don't think he's being tricky. I just think they're just too fussy about it looking good. But so those could have been among the ones that were burned, or they could have just totally fragmented, and that's why they had them copy parts into these books. But the first 3 fragments we have returned because they were under glass, and they were actually in drawers. And that might have been what the Chicago Museum ended up with. The other parts were intact. So it's one scroll. It's like about 3 feet long. We have 1 foot. And there's about 2 feet that got burnt, because this is the one that Egyptologist described in 1857, I think it was, or 6 or 7, and maybe after that. But it was before they sold it to the Chicago Woods Museum. He described it, and he described facsimile 3, that's at the end of, probably the end of the papyrus. John Gee and Kerry Muhlstein tried to say that there was another book, which was Abraham, after that. And they have absolutely no evidence for that. It would help if they had some characters that came off of it, or something. But, so they have this, what historians would call the fallacy of possible proof, which is, there's other scrolls in Egypt that have more than one book on them, because they would make them like 15 feet long, a blank one, and then they would cut it up and make their books. And they would mass produce these books of the dead, and some would be better than others. And these Joseph Smith ones weren't terribly good, and they come from the Ptolemaic period. And Abraham's day didn't have vignettes, or the drawings, on these Egyptian papyri. So John Gee knows that when the document, Joseph Smith's translation, refers to the drawing at the beginning of the record, Abraham could not have written that. So he tries to get around that by saying that these parts were added, but no, they weren't added. These parts referring to the facsimile were not added. They were corrected, like I mentioned, a little bit, but they weren't added whole cloth. They're just totally wrong about that. So, and that Abraham and the Egyptologists go out of their minds, like Robert Rittner and Conan Cohen, anyway, for the Egyptians to put a Hebrew text that denied their gods with their most sacred book together on one scroll, bury it with the dead, it'd just be totally outrageous. They wouldn't do, it'd be crazy. They wouldn't do that. It doesn't fit. So, for John Gee and Kerry Muhlestein to argue that, some other scrolls have more than one book, therefore this could have another book, that's a fallacy of possible proof. You need to make it probable for a historian to pay any attention. Anybody that respects evidence needs more than that. And so there's a huge, huge problem with trying to say the scrolls were longer. And Kerry Muhlestein published in the Journal of Mormon History fairly recently, year or so ago, where he tried to prove what I call the long scroll theory, which is he tried to get people to say that after 1837, when these fragments were cut off, or they probably fell off and they were mounted under glass, other people described, they would come along, these were not Mormons, most of these people, they would come along and have the tour and see the mummies, and Lucy Smith would show some of the scrolls. She would roll out the scroll and say, well, this is a record of Abraham. I mean, he said a long scroll, but who knows what a long scroll is, but it could be the 2 foot, and when it's only 4 inches wide, 2 feet looks like long. And she rolled out this long scroll and said this was record 8. It could have been facsimile 3 and the rest of what broke off and got burnt. It doesn't mean that, it goes on for 10 feet. Gee tries to say that this scroll was like 10 feet long, at least for 2 books, because that's what he needs it to be. But there's no other examples of books of breathing being written with other books along with it. And why would Abraham write a record and then refer to the facsimile at the beginning of his record? So there's so many wishful thinkings going on with this kind of approach to arguing. Nibley first tried, this is just a variation of what Nibley first tried, actually. He tried to say, there's red writing, there's no red writing on it. And Mike Marquardt wrote a response after he said that, Cowdery's describing both records together, that they're beautifully written in black ink and a part in red ink, which the scroll that was identified as Joseph has red ink things here and there all over the place. So he didn't separate. And the people that came along, Muhlestein he has like 7 testimonies. Most of them are this. They took the tour and said that, we saw the scrolls from which the Book of Abraham came from, or scroll. And without differentiating between the fragments under the glass and the intact scroll, So he says, they can't be referring. So we saw the scroll, which could be that 2 feet, from which the Book of Abraham came from, which is, they're looking at facsimile 3, and because the translation documents take characters from the fragments under the glass, Muhlestein argues, that means that the translation of the Book of Abraham didn't come from those fragments. It really came from the scroll, which probably had a part that went longer and included the Book of Abraham. So, which doesn't work at all. I mean, the people making these comments don't have the information that they need to answer the question that Muhlstein's trying to answer.
Okay. Well, I've kept you a long time, and I really appreciate you spending so much time.
Sure.
Is there anything you want to finish up with on this? You want to talk about any of your either books in the work or past books that are for sale or anything like that?
I don't have anything for sale right now, really. I'm trying to put together a book on the Book of Abraham that's based on those 8 videos that I made on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
I'm also working in completing in about a year and a half my biography of Joseph Smith in Kirtland, Ohio, and far west Missouri.
Oh, cool. And then how many other books have you written total?
I don't know, about 18 probably.
18?
Well, there's the 8-volume History of the Church, critical edition, 5 volumes.
That's really expensive too, isn't it?
About $1,000,
Yeah.
but it might be more now. But really, not that much if you consider how long it took me. 10 years.
Yeah, I bet.
So, and I got paid as I went on that one, and I don't get royalties. So, but they're all sold out, I think.
Well, I know, but only libraries can afford those, right?
No, there's a lot of people bought them.
It's out of my price range. I know that.
Oh, yeah. So maybe they'll come out with a Kindle edition. Huh?
There you go. There you go.
Then there was 5 volumes of the early Mormon documents, which was all the documents I could get my hands on from that pertain to Joseph Smith and the Smith family that pertains to before 1831. They might date afterwards, but I only took out parts of these excerpts or whatever I needed, whole documents, civil documents, diaries, legal documents, anything that dealt with Mormonism before 1831. And my first book was on Indian origins in the Book of Mormon, which was a survey of the pre-1830 literature on the Indians and theories about how the origin of the Indians being from the 10 tribes, the mound builder myth about a white race being destroyed by the darker Indian race and buried in the mounds. There were different kinds of mounds, fortification mounds, temple mounds, and burial mounds. And they imagined they're a long chain from South America through Central America up to the Great Lakes region, where they were destroyed in the Great Lakes region. So that's basically the Book of Mormon historical framework. And the Indian Israelite thesis, Joseph Smith picking a different version than the 10 tribes, but still Israelite. My second book was The Religious Seekers and the Advent of Mormonism, which was about the priesthood, or authority anyway, being restored by new apostles being sent. And these apostles would have a new revelation, and some of these seekers imagined it possible that an angel could be sent to ordain new apostles. And that was in Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith Sr. was influenced in the seeker belief that there was a complete apostasy and that we're waiting for a restoration. And Lucy Mack Smith's brother, Jason Mack, was a seeker preacher, actually, and had a communal group in New Brunswick, I mean. So that was my second book. The third book was The Word of God, a collection of essays on Mormon scripture. There was contribution to Brent's book on new approaches to the Book of Mormon, where I wrote about anti-universalist rhetoric in the Book of Mormon. The Order of Nehor in the Book of Mormon are basically universalists, where the missionaries, Alma, Amulek, preach against the Nehorites. So that's all has subtle messages, and the way they use scripture out of the New Testament against universalism is the same as Joseph Smith's contemporaries, the Christians against, or mainstream Christians against universalism and Unitarianism. So that's what that article is about. And
Mormonism Unveiled, Making of a Prophet.
The American Apocrypha, which had 2 essays in there, one on Anti-Masonry Revisited, which was a spin-off of an article I wrote in the John Whitmer Historical Journal on the Book of Mormon as an anti-Masonic Bible, which is words quoted from Martin Harris. The Book of Mormon is the anti-Masonic Bible, he said, up in Ohio. So, northern Ohio. So in that American Apocrypha book, there's that essay and another essay on the Book of Mormon witnesses and how they actually saw the plates or felt the plates and what really probably happened from a fuller analysis of all of the testimonies that they gave during their life.
You are prolific.
Then the Edie Howe book.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's good.
Oh,
I'll provide a link
to
your Amazon page.
Joe Smith biography, The Making of a Prophet. Anyway.
Oh, cool. All right. Well,
so I love studying Mormon history. I studied. Well, I'm still a DNA Mormon, 6th generation Mormon. I loved studying Mormonism when I was a believer in it, and the love of studying Mormon history didn't leave me because my interpretations changed over time as I learned. Anyway.
Well, cool.
Thanks for coming and talking to me.
I appreciate it. So are you coming to MHA, by the way?
No.
No? Oh, that's too bad. I'll be there. Since
I might be there for Sunstone.
Oh, good. All right. Well, Dan Vogel, thank you so much. I appreciate all your time.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.